Hello. Welcome, everyone. This is Causal Islands Podcast EP05. My name is Boris Mann. I'm the founder of Fission and host of Causal Islands. And we are building a second brain with Subconscious. And the founders, Gordon and Chris. Hello, Gordon and Chris.
Hello.
So I realized one of the things that we talked about ahead of time, we've known each other for a while and talk about this a lot in this these labels of things of tools for thought and second brain, and of course the episode is called Building a Second Brain. So can we get started maybe with just saying, what is subconscious? What is the second brain that you were building?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess subconscious is a tool for thinking together, and it's powered by a decentralized protocol that stores thoughts the way your brain does. I guess you could call it a tool for thought. We're sort of thinking of it as a literal second subconscious that you're building. I think a lot of the tools for
Aha.
thought space, yeah, they sort of focus on, conscious thought. And what Kahneman, I guess Daniel Kahneman would call like system two thinking. But actually, probably the most powerful part of our mind is unconscious. And there's these sort of endless stories of artists and scientists sleeping on it and awaking with an answer. And so we wanted to sort of approach the tools for thought space with that attitude and something that works a bit like that. So notes go in, and with a combination of this decentralized knowledge graph and a little bit of AI, it dreams up insights and connections and breakthroughs.
Awesome. And we've opened up the product versus protocol right away as well. And the protocol that supports this, can you tell us a little bit about that?
I guess here's what we could say about subconscious and the protocol. It's a little bit like the difference between Gmail and IMAP, right? So we're building a product called Subconscious. And at the same time, we're building this open protocol called Noosphere. And now Noosphere is completely open and permissionless, and it's also a pretty general purpose protocol. So we are hopeful that others will build on top of it as well. But the thing that it solves is basically building a sort of giant distributed thought graph. So I guess you could think of it as sort of what if Rome or Notion, but an open-ended protocol. Now, for me, the reason why I started pulling on this thread is I love this space. I love tools for thought. But I've used over the years a number of them, SaaS products, and some of them have gone out of business. And I ended up losing large chunks of my second brain when these SaaS products went out of business. So I felt like it was important to be able to own your thoughts. And this is for a variety of reasons a very difficult thing to do with the web as it works today. And to really sort of like hand ownership of data to the user, you kind of have to rebuild parts of the stack. You end up having to build a protocol. And that's more or less what we've done, sort of created the thinnest vertical slice of a knowledge graph protocol that sort of guarantees you data ownership and credible exit.
Yeah, so maybe expanding a little bit on some of what Gordon just said. When I first talked to Gordon about the product that he was hoping to build that eventually came to be known as Subconscious, we talked about a few different sort of underlying goals for user data within the product. And some of those included, as Gordon mentioned, credible exit, but also like local first, offline, multi-device editing, the ability to sort of craft durable links to content. And as we started to explore, the different possible tools we could bring to bear to achieve these goals, we started to put together a set of protocols, a set of technologies that, some of which were pulled out of the ecosystem, and some of which we sort of innovated on a little bit ourselves, to enable the capabilities in Subconscious, while also preserving the qualities that we wanted in the protocol that were frankly not subconscious specific and wouldn't really even have meaning if they weren't generalized enough for example, other tools to implement and interoperate with.
Yeah, I mean, and I realize that we're like, there's just a blizzard of terms here, but we're just going to keep moving and annotate some notes after the fact. So I think an unlock for me in so one being excited to use subconscious to be a beta tester in my own sort of 20 plus years of blogging and notes and sewing on it. So very, very much resonate with a bunch of those terms. But an unlock for me was really the like, oh no, you can just use Noosphere for that. Okay, Boris, if are like logsec for a particular use case, but you're having some pains around sync and perhaps publishing, you could just use Noosphere for that. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight that isn't necessarily clear for people. And so maybe you could respond to that about like that tension between product and protocol, and where you're building subconscious right now as an iOS app first, and maybe you could speak to that as well. And then how you think about the protocol being interleaved into other products.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, this quality is very important to us, the ability to kind of build multiple products on top of the same data, for a couple reasons. One is I don't think that you really meaningfully own your data unless you can do something useful with it. Like if you use a SaaS app today, I guess GDPR mandates that they give you some sort of export. But what that typically looks like is just morass of custom JSON files. And to do better than this, I think we need something that's almost a little bit like the role that the file system played in the desktop operating system. So this is kind of interesting, actually. The file system was like this shared pool of resources that every app could read from and write to. And mobile operating systems don't really expose this in the same way, but it had this interesting consequence, which was you could have multiple apps editing the same file. And I think this is very important because on the one hand, you want to own your data, and a file system sort of guarantees that. But even beyond that, I don't think any one tool can sort of imagine all of the possible use cases that you might want to do, right? So this is pretty cool, actually. If you have this shared substrate that belongs to the user, then you can start to actually piece multiple apps together into workflows. For my money, this is actually why the desktop to this day remains like the sort of tool for professional work, because you can actually piece together those workflows. And I would actually kind of say the extent to which a workflow is embodied in a single app is sort of the extent to which it's commodity. Like it's not really professional work as much as it is kind of like just a kind of consumer use case at that point. So these are both really important to us, like the ability to own your data and the ability to kind of have multiple apps built on top of it. There's another term for this, which is adversarial interoperability, which is kind of this notion that if the user owns their data, you can actually have interoperability emerge in retrospect. Like apps don't really have to agree on a format. What happens is actually through competition, you get interops. So on the desktop, for example, Photoshop creates the PSD, which is this proprietary format for images. But then all their competitors were like, well, we want to make it easy to switch, so we're going to reverse engineer PSD. And eventually PSD becomes a sort of de facto standard. And this is possible specifically because you have this data substrate that belongs exclusively to the user. The app can't tell the user no. So we wanted to kind of build a protocol that was multiplayer, but still retained this quality. The web doesn't. The web has these kinds of like castle walls around each website, preventing easy interoperability. But doing that was an interesting adventure. We had to kind of relitigate some of the low-level security issues, I guess, of the web.
Right. And of course, the model very much so in a browser context of where in a SaaS product, you maybe have a couple of database rows that belong to you, and how that's actually expressed to something that you can use elsewhere, is APIs rather than more portable bits on disk. So Chris, hearing Gordon talk about that and your goals around the protocol and other products on top, who do you want as a builder, as a developer, to get excited about building on top of Noosphere?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been working in open source for a long time, and I have to say, there's always a delicate balance to be struck when you're trying to make something that's open source and freely available for everybody, and also re-implementable in lots of different contexts, while also trying to build a product or like an overarching theme of Subconscious's efforts. I like to say that we are essentially building a protocol in support of a product, and the product's
Right.
requirements and its capabilities really govern the direction of the protocol. And the protocol is open source and open to feedback and contributions from literally everybody. But at the end of the day, its capabilities really do have to be in service of the product that we're
Right.
building, and to some degree, especially in these early days when the product is still, a work in progress, even though it is quite featureful at this point. That means that we kind of have moments where we have to make significant breaking changes. APIs may be considered rather unstable, although as a matter of just like general trajectory of the work, the actual capabilities of the protocol don't necessarily change. I would say like in these early days, that means folks who are involved and who want to either contribute to the protocol directly or make use of it have to kind of have a tolerance for radioactivity in the API.
Here there be gremlins. It might
Yes.
eat your lunch.
Um,
We're talking about long-term durable storage of thoughts, but right now, maybe keep a copy of those markdown files in a separate folder too.
Yes, and we try and Gordon can back me up on this. We try to, keep in our minds at any moment of, severe breaking change that there are, people who may be affected by these, even though their number may be small in these early days. And I want to also just caveat all of this by saying that we want any and every interested person who wants to contribute, even just by way of giving feedback in our Discord, to do so. And we do basically read everything everybody writes there and on GitHub and talk about it amongst ourselves and in public with them. So
Great. We've got a couple of questions in here. I know I have said to you all, so Subconscious is the product. It's an iOS app. We'll get back to that in a second and let Gordon rip. But sticking with Noosphere, the Noosphere implementation, I run it on my desktop. It's a command line tool. What's that called?
yeah, let me talk about Orb for a second. So Noosphere is integrated into Subconscious, the app, via our Rust crate, which can be built as a static library that can be linked to any C, C++ compatible binary you may have. But we do have a reference client that we distribute that works out of the box that you can run on any command line on Linux if you want to use our pre-built binary, or it also works on Mac OS and Windows if you are willing to build it yourself. And you can get that utility on our GitHub page, github.com/subconsciousnetwork/Noosphere. Yeah, so on the releases page, you can find pre-built Linux binaries there. But it's pretty straightforward to build it yourself. If you're handy on the command line, there's documentation for doing this in the GitHub project.
And it's called Orb. The actual
Yeah.
tool implementation that I would be using would
Yeah,
be Orb.
and it works very similarly to Git in terms of how you might think about how your mental model might work for approaching reading and writing data. You essentially create a workspace where you can write files to your file system, save them to your Noosphere data model. And then if you happen to be in the closed beta today, you can actually authorize this client to access the same data that you are saving in our managed infrastructure context and sync back and forth between the subconscious app and this command line client. So, people on our team, and I think this might also be true of you, Boris, use this workflow to essentially bring whatever text editor they want to the table to work on their subconscious notebooks and sync back and forth with the iOS app.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some layering there. So I'll just actually mention Brent's question here. If I wanted to incorporate Noosphere's Rust crate into another language ecosystem, is there anything else that we should take into account?
We try to include our FFI bindings in scope for when we consider how versions change. So the one thing I'll say up front is if you see a minor version change in our Rust crate, that will give you the ability to assume that the FFI bindings did not break in any way across that version change. And then, of course, if you see a major version bump, you might want to check the changelog just to make sure that the FFI bindings stayed the same. As far as considerations are concerned, I mean, if you're familiar with Rust, obviously you get certain guarantees around memory safety and other things. Once you kind of go cross into the territory of other languages, there's a certain amount of responsibility on the caller to retain pointers and to free them at the appropriate time. So yeah, I'd say to some extent this is standard cross-language integration consideration.
I will say the Swift integration. So we use Swift on the iOS app, and that means we're basically integrating this Rust crate with another language. And the wrapper that we ended up writing for the Rust crate was like a couple hundred lines of code, maybe a little less. So it's fairly approachable. I'd say it's sort of on par with embedding something like SQLite.
Yeah, I think that's a good pointer, and it including the it's kind of like Git. So let's say it for the record is that Noosphere we put a couple of different high level labels, this connected knowledge graph. We've said things like Git. Guess what? It's a syncable file system. Because that's what we've said we need for interop. So you can, edit text files, and use that in other systems. Again, subconscious is going to read and write a certain format. Speaking for myself, I have this unholy workflow of getting stuff to work on mobile, where I run a working copy Git client on my mobile devices in order to sync. And that's not purely, idealism or masochism. It's just that there isn't any other way to do multiplayer sync. And it works in quotation marks. But this is one of the reasons I'm very excited about Noosphere as this substrate. And so we've got this file system, we've got syncing, asterisk multiplayer, and some knowledge and durable linking, which I think is interesting. And bouncing back up to the product layer, and to a comment here from Nick is, but wait, AI. So we've got some notes. They can connect to things, and we've got an iOS app that's with us at all times. We've got some fun competition happening with Apple releasing Journal, maybe. So how do you think about me using subconscious in my pocket?
Yeah,
specifically with
there's
AI.
a lot to unpack there. Yeah. Let's see. We could talk about this in terms of, sharing layers between protocols and products. We could talk about what subconscious the product looks like and how we think about AI. Which of these paths do we want to go down?
I think AI, and I'm, we'll agree to just use that as a term right now.
Sure.
As a big bucket of stuff that's happening. I think that's an interesting one. I talked about my 20 years of notes and some of the people I've been on this 20-year-long journey with. I've always wanted tools to introspect that stack of notes to help tell me what I'm thinking. So how do you think about AI plus subconscious maybe initially when you got started, and then like in the today of the waning days of 2023.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I guess, like you, I have, oh my goodness, more than a decade now of pretty dense notes. And at first, this started as a coping mechanism for ADHD. But eventually it grew into
Snaps.
yeah, yeah. It's a kind of cognitive prosthetic. It's what keeps me functional. If I were on the savannah and we were hunting big game together, probably that little cognitive quirk wouldn't cost me anything. But I live in the modern world, and everyone requires me to be very punctual and organized and to sort of keep things on track. And the way that I adapted to kind of cope with this is writing a lot of notes because my memory is bad. And it turned out there's just a lot of good stuff in 10 years of notes. I started, sort of, I guess, the kernel of subconscious when I started noodling on this idea 2.5 years ago, maybe. I started noodling on these kind of simple algorithms to try to find patterns within my notes and reflect them back to me. And also to kind of give my notes a chance to think back. Like, we call these things second brains, tools for thought, like Notion or Roam. But largely, the way we use them is we sort of create a note and we lob it into the void, and we never really see it again unless we think to search for it. But actually, it's a really interesting kind of collection of information, because it's everything that matters to me in a pile, and I kind of want to know what it has to say to me. So in the beginning, I was this is before GPT, even probably around when they were building GPT-1. I was just kind of noodling with some very, very simple algorithmic kind of filters and generative algorithms to reflect insights back to me, to ask me questions, to find connections. Then GPT happens, and all of a sudden this idea of like, what if my notebook were enchanted with a little agent kind of gets multiplied by 100. And at first I'm kind of like holding my breath, because I'm like, okay, this one company invented this crazy new technology and it seems like they have a lock on the future. But then all these open source models start to emerge.
Yeah.
And so, all this stuff is changing really quickly. But I would say that I'm going to bet that in 2024, we see the emergence of on-device inference. Google already announced it. I will be shocked if Apple doesn't ship something. So we're quickly tumbling into this world where these models, they're both high-quality open source models that you can run in the cloud. And there are probably going to be some on-device models that you can run as well. So from a sort of, I guess, design perspective, here's how I see AI. I think it's often conceptualized as a sort of big brain that you ask questions and it's supposed to give you back factual answers. Like, this is kind of the maybe the Hollywood picture of AI, is that it's some sort of like big brain god that you ask questions of and it delivers the answer. I actually don't think that this is a good description of what LLMs are at all. It actually, if you look at the papers, LLMs seem to simulate reasoning by reaching for a bunch of pre-baked reasoning-like behavior that's in their training data. And so Stephen Wolfram, who's a sort of AI researcher, he's sort of observed that they're actually computationally shallow. You shouldn't think of what they're doing as reasoning. It's more like they're free associating. And I took a look at this and I was like, oh my gosh, like an LLM.
Drop acid and talk to yourself.
Yes, it's not artificial intelligence. It's artificial intuition. And I think this is actually a really big deal, because computers have been able to do formal reasoning from the very beginning. But the thing that they've been very bad at is that sort of fast, loose, system one kind of intuitive, fuzzy thinking that is actually really key for creative breakthroughs. And it's not about finding facts. It's like, we shouldn't think of them as hallucinating. They're dreaming. Like we basically taught computers to sort of generate creative insights. So this is kind of I guess, the design approach that we're taking to LLMs is let's take all of those insights that you've been jotting down and start to use things like embeddings to look for associations, maybe ideas that are connected, maybe reflect them back to you with questions. And I'm a lot less interested in the AI thinking for me. I'm a lot less interested in prompting the AI. I actually kind of want the AI to prompt me, to
Right.
kind of be my second subconscious.
Taking it back to, I think, the Apple Journal and devices and ownership, I think, is an interesting direction as a baseline with subconscious as product powered by Noosphere. Even just that syncing means that enterprising people could, in fact, run all sorts of models on their much more powerful desktops
Very
over the
true.
same corpus, so that unblocks experimentation, but very little of those, again, without Boris Mann trademark working copy iOS highly complicated Git workflows, could unlock that, also having it in your pocket. So subconscious, the product that you take notes on, that's always with you. Let's talk about that again. Roam or Notion are started as web SaaS products, and they have some mobile. You've written in Swift on top of powered by Noosphere, and you're
Which I
situated
have
on
mixed feelings
iOS.
about, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah, iOS for me
please.
was not it's not a natural fit. Like both Chris and I are deep web guys. Chris worked at Cloudflare. We both worked on Chrome. I worked on Firefox at Mozilla. Like we know the web deeply and we love it. So building mobile first was not. It was it was a hard to swallow pill. But I felt a couple things about this. One is I don't know how this is for you, but I felt like the experience of using a tool like Notion or Roam or Obsidian on mobile was not that great. And I don't think the barrier here is necessarily technological. I think it's very difficult to take a product that has been imagined for desktop
Yeah,
first
yeah,
and then shrink it down. Whereas conversely, starting with mobile and then growing up tends to work a little bit better. I think in general, like you can't starve an elephant to get a mouse. It's just it's a difficult thing to do. So that was one reason we decided to go this direction, and another was that I feel like the notebook you have with you is the best notebook. In a sense, I think you're not competing with something like Roam so much as you're competing with Apple Notes. Like this is the dark matter of tools for thought. If everyone does it and no one talks about it, no one even conceives of it as a tool for thought. But I think that actually in some ways these sort of notebooks that ship with your phone, they underserve. They're not that great. And even Apple is starting to recognize it. They're building this journal app. To me, this says a couple things. One, that tools for thought are going mainstream, and
right.
two, that
Yeah,
that some of the big players like Google and Apple have finally kind of wrapped their heads around that. Like it's more than just a to-do sticky notes, right? But yeah, anyway, this is why we decided to go mobile. I think it's been difficult in some ways. I chafe a little bit at like the Apple ecosystem, but I gotta say the results are good. It's really nice to have an app that feels good on device because it was designed for the device to begin with. I think it also forced early on some really meaningful decisions. Like we wrote the protocol stack in Rust, and a lot of decentralized protocols end up being written in JavaScript, which kind of means they can run in a browser, but it's very difficult to run them anywhere else. By contrast, Noosphere can kind of run anywhere because you can compile it for native and it has C bindings, so it can sort of interface with any language. And you can also compile it for web and run it as a WebAssembly blob. So it
right.
has this nice kind of portability.
I just wanted to also add, kind of in the theme of mobile being the edge that we use to hone our focus. we are pretty heavily integrated with a lot of technologies that are associated with the IPFS ecosystem, but we don't embed full-fledged IPFS implementation in our app. And in fact, our entire protocol has sort of been structured around the assumption that it only includes the bare minimum set of technologies to be interoperable with that ecosystem. And we probably wouldn't have had that kind of focus on keeping it lightweight and keeping it very fast
Right.
if we hadn't started from this position of, well, it absolutely needs to run on a mobile phone, and it has to
Yeah.
run well enough that nobody can tell that there's all of this kind of decentralized magic under the hood.
Can't be draining your battery. Can't fail to load things.
Exactly.
I'm very excited about. I continue to be excited about Noosphere and Subconscious in the context of, like I said, selfishly as me, I don't have a lot of choices. I was giving some feedback to someone who had done a trick where I'm like, oh yeah, I tried that before. Stick logsec in your iCloud drive, and then you quickly find out that because it wasn't really designed to work with some of the quirks of iCloud Drive and how it syncs or rather doesn't, you're going to get data loss, and that's not really going to work. Damn it.
Mm-hmm.
This is an integrated platform. And one of the things I've been saying is that we need some primitives that are protocols, not apps. And a lot of those are some of those things that Apple gives in its integrated platform, but you can't really reuse elsewhere. So merely Noosphere as sync as a building block that can work on mobile and can work on web, super exciting.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's worth calling out too. It's extraordinarily difficult to do both ownership of your own data and multiplayer. And I think all these sharp edges that you're running into are sort of the invisible asymptotic limits that you hit when you try to get both. Like it often manifests as sync conflicts or inability to like easily share with other people. And
let's just define for a second, because Gordon, you and I have a comfortable shared context around multiplayer, and we've actually been called out on this before, where literally multiplayer starts with me and my laptop as two players.
That is true.
So anyone who is listening to this, we don't necessarily mean moving cursors at the same time in some shared environment or something where you're typing over each other. We're talking about the back and forth of starting with two devices of the same person, one, and from there moving into multiple humans with multiple devices. Not mostly async. Is that a decent right. Multiplayer?
Yeah. So I mean, this is sort of like, as engineers, we like to try to boil problems down to some sort of like the simplest case, right? So in the simplest, sort of most abstract case, multiplayer means more than one thing, right? So that could mean you have a phone and a laptop, or it could mean I have a phone and Boris has a phone. And that, conceptually can scale all the way to like multiple cursors in the same document, like a Google Doc. I think regardless of where on that spectrum you fall, you end up having to solve most of the same key problems. So one of those key problems is sync. Anytime you have more than one copy of something, you're going to run into the problem of having to reconcile differences between those copies. And this is a deceptively difficult thing to do. Like to your point, Boris, even iCloud chokes on this many, many times. There are some answers to this question. And I would say that, the number of answers that work are pretty short and not that easy to engineer. And so, if you're tackling this problem, you probably want to lean into existing pretty rigorously researched answers. So you want to probably model yourself off of maybe a system like Git, which is what we've done, or use a technology like CRDTs, or some of both. In any case, sync. Sync is one of the big ones. Another one, if you're talking about multiplayer with multiple humans, especially, is security and privacy. Like anytime there's more than one human player, you are now in an adversarial environment. This is what you should assume anyway if you're designing a protocol, because there are bad guys out there, right, who want to mess with your stuff. And so there are a number of challenges to solve when it comes to security and privacy in a multiplayer context. The web has a set of answers for this, and its answer to every security and privacy problem is to basically put a wall around what's called the origin, which is basically the domain name that the data comes from. So this is, we might call this like a castle wall kind of security model. The challenge is that sort of baked in with that assumption is lock-in. So if you are pulling data from Facebook.com, it is literally impossible for Facebook to interop with other websites, even if they, wanted to. Because that's another way of looking at that, is that it's a security vulnerability, a privacy vulnerability. To do better, you actually have to, the tyranny of origins. Yeah, exactly. To do better than this sort of feudal castle wall approach to security, you actually kind of need to reimagine security. And in zero trust networking, the basic idea is you root security in individual users rather than sort of drawing these arbitrary lines around origins. Why does this matter? The reason it matters is if you kind of root security in individual users who can freely associate with each other, then users actually are able to own their data and freely choose where that data goes. So this is one of the things that we had to tackle with Noosphere. It's a frustratingly painful problem to solve because we've been building on this web stack now for 30, 40 years. And this is one of the deepest assumptions the web has, that everything is sort of secured with a castle wall. And the funny thing is that app stores went and they just copied what the web did. So, content is sandboxed to origins. It's also sandboxed to apps. So apps have this exact same interoperability problem on iOS and Android. So, I think you use something like Notion or Roam, or even to some degree Obsidian or Logsec. They do better because you can get your files. But once you start talking about multiplayer, you're going to have to probably do that through a SaaS context, which is locked in. And the only way to really get both ownership and multiplayer is to reimagine the protocol layer, which for our sins, we decided to do. So here we are.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Like this is not a lark. It is looking around and saying, I don't see anything. It needs to be a protocol. Yes, we want to build a product, but we hold these principles. And to your point about your background with web and everything else like that, you're building a product. It needs to iterate in a market in mobile that expects a certain pace and a protocol. Why?
I ask myself that every day. I think it is an interesting challenge to try to build a product that is fun to use and that people love, and at the same time build a protocol, which is infrastructure and a lot of heavy lifting engineering. I am deeply grateful that Chris is my co-founder, and I'm also deeply grateful that we have a number of heavy lifter engineers who are working with us on this problem. Brilliant people. I would be completely at sea if I were on my own. Yeah, I guess here's how I think about this. And the reason I think this is such a challenge to build both a product and a protocol is that they sort of live in different temporal zones, like different time zones. Stuart Brand, who is this thinker, I guess, systems thinker, he has this nice mental framework that he calls pace layering. And he points out that most systems tend to kind of sort themselves into multiple layers. He calls them shearing layers. You can almost visualize this as like concentric circles, and the outer circles are moving faster. Some of the circles that he points to in most human systems, starting from the top, the sort of fastest base layer would be fashion. Like we end up having sort of cyclical or new fashions every, I don't know, year or couple years. Maybe underneath that is commerce. I would say that that's where a product lives. Buying and selling, trading, making deals. This is commerce. This is a product. But underneath all of that is infrastructure. Like products don't exist in a vacuum. They actually need infrastructure to run. And in the technological world, this includes things like, DNS, the literal cable that runs through the ground that connects us all up over the internet, as well as protocols. In the outside of tech, an example of infrastructure might be the laws that we use to organize society.
We
Even
drive
lower,
on the right-hand side of the road or the left-hand side of the
yeah,
road.
right side of the road. Yeah, exactly.
Kind of
Yeah, maybe
important.
even yeah, lower than that, we have things like governance, culture, and then ultimately, nature, because we're at some level just a little, sort of fuzzy thing that is just growing on top of the surface of this giant thing called the planet, right?
So you've talked about this commerce layer, and the protocol layer is lower down. So I guess that's also
Right.
where kind of multiple products come from, either you or from others. I think that's very interesting in thinking about. So kind of in the same way that we have multiple browsers.
Yeah, exactly. Or the way that HTTP has outlived any one of those browsers. So, we had Tim Berners-Lee's browser, which the first browser, which doesn't exist anymore. And then we had Netscape, and then Netscape became Firefox, and we had IE, and IE's gone. And now we have, Chrome, and Firefox is still around, and we have Edge, and we have, Opera. And so, at the commerce layer, apps come and go. But lower down, you have the infrastructure layer, the protocols, and the ones that survive tend to survive a very long time. Infrastructure often outlasts many other things. You can still point to Roman aqueducts, right, that are functioning to this day. That's
Right.
infrastructure. It literally outlived a civilization in that case. So here's why this is important to me. I feel like if you're doing I don't know, social Twitter, let's say, I'm like a Twitter addict, very silly, especially these days. Um, I don't think Twitter's going to be around in another couple years, or at least I think the risk that it's not is pretty great. I used MySpace at one time because I'm an elder millennial, and that's gone. These things, they come and go. And in a lot of cases, it's sort of okay. Like I'm okay if my tweets disappear forever. I'm not going to shed too many tears. They're not that important in the grand scheme of things. They're at the fashion layer or maybe the commerce layer. But my thoughts, like my thoughts, actually, this is sort of something that's deeper and more important to me. I have, at least 10 years of notes. For me, they make up a lot of my memory. I mentioned I have ADHD, I don't have a good memory, so it's a piece of me. And I really think that we want our thoughts to exist at a lower, slower pace layer that outlasts any individual, sort of flavor of the month SaaS product. And I include what we're doing in that category, right? Like Subconscious, I think is going to be a great app, and it's going to hopefully last a very long time. But every commercial product has a natural lifespan. Who knows? I kind of think maybe text files, maybe HTTP, these things could last a very, very long time. And in fact, they already have.
I'll also just add, here in 2023, in some ways, we're extremely spoiled for choice if what we just want is a really nice text editing and note-taking experience on our platform of choice.
Right.
Like Roam and Obsidian, or if you use VS Code, or even if you use command line tools like Vim or Emacs, and there's Notion, and there's all of these products that are coming out from Google and Apple. If those products suit your use case and you don't find yourself thinking like, oh, well, I can't really link to this Apple Note from my Google Keep and have these things sort of like connect to each other, you've got a lot of great options. We're trying to build something that essentially checks a box or scratches an itch that we just don't see being checked or scratched by anything else at this point. We're building a wonderful product in the form of Subconscious to go along with it, but it wouldn't be as satisfying to build it if it didn't also have this component of credit full exit and sort of plurality of access to the data.
Right. And I think like let's go through the layers. my own multiplayer usage of having access to my stuff with multiple different tools. Secondarily, adding other humans to the mix and AI companions. And then the Noosphere, because that's what the name is. A web or Noosphere of interlinked documents and this word knowledge graph. And I think that's what we all kind of, who are interested in this space, see one way or another. Some of it can go all the way to, hey, let's mess around with syntax when I'm typing or dictating or hallucinating with a friend. But then the other part is the the web's not quite going to work for this. How do we create graph-like structures at scale with many other people? So I want to highlight that because it's like, no, that's the piece that none of those other things have at all. And it means some work in the rules of the road of connecting into this new sphere, which is exciting. There's a question here from Matri that I think is going to be a little bit of a right angle term, but bear with me. I think it's good. So if we think about just notes or just Markdown or something you can edit with Emacs, is a question that basically says, how do you think about supporting knowledge in the form of computation? So documents that combine reactivity, this is another thing that we don't see very widely in a lot of tools for thought today.
Yeah. I have two answers to this, one for the protocol and one for the app we're building. So on the protocol side, Noosphere is actually a very open-ended protocol. You could think of it as a kind of envelope format, and you can put anything in the envelope that you want. So you could put Markdown in there, you could put images in there, you could put JavaScript in there. And actually the structure of Noosphere, the graph itself, is made up of these nodes called memos, which are these envelopes. And it's very similar to a packet or an HTTP response. It basically has some key value headers and then a body part, which is like any content that you want. And it supports whatever type of content you like as well. What kind of content can go in Noosphere? Certainly Turing complete scripting can go in Noosphere. Then you have to execute it somehow. So I guess that brings us to clients and how you want to actually evaluate this content. Now, in Subconscious itself, I wanted to do something kind of interesting with the way we tackle this problem. So on the web, every page is a mixture of, I guess you could call it dumb data and live Turing complete scripting, JavaScript. And the web is very powerful because it mixes these two things together, which kind of makes every page kind of like a mini app. But there is, I think, a cost to this power, which is now you have a security problem on your hands because a Turing complete language can literally do anything. Like that's the definition, including bad things. And that means you have to trap the genie in a bottle. You have to actually trap these pages inside of a sandbox. And this is what a lot of what browsers are doing for you, is sort of keeping those pages safe. This is actually, normally fine, but what it means is that pages outside of the, same origin, they can't really communicate with each other. If they could, it suddenly becomes possible to do all sorts of nefarious things. We call this a cross-site scripting attack. So for Subconscious, I wanted to kind of look at this and maybe approach it with a twist. So our app, as opposed to the protocol, kind of makes a hard distinction between data and scripting. So on the one hand, we have a format that we call subtext, which I guess you could think of as a kind of block editor semantics version of Markdown. It's like similar to Markdown, but it's sort of chunked up into nice little blocks. And that is just data. You're free to reference, all sorts of documents from subtext, but it's just a note. On the other hand, we have scripting. And so sort of what we've thought of as scripting in the Subconscious world is something a little bit like a bot. It's basically a function that can read some part of the graph and then publish a new graph. And these bots are people too in Subconscious. You can follow people.
Right.
you can follow bots, and they're both sort of part of your web of trust if you choose to follow them. So that's kind of how we've approached the scripting question in subconscious. Now, that said, I think I want to reiterate, Noosphere actually doesn't have an opinion about this. If you wanted to bring your own app, like let's say you wanted to plug Noosphere into a Jupyter notebook, you could certainly do this, and it would be no problem at all to load up a JavaScript file and run it in a particular context of your choice. And I think we'll probably see a lot of answers to this question as we see other apps built on top of Noosphere.
Yeah, right. So as an example, let's underline this. Remember, Noosphere has the web in its sights. So HTTPS, and we can also think of protocols gone by like Gopher or Gemini. It has different trade-offs of what it's trying to do, but that does mean that you can put anything inside of it. Inside memos are the nodes. So rather than an HTML page or response, you've got nodes, and so you could have inside of that subtext, which is what subconscious natively reads and writes, or it could be JavaScript, or it could be logsec flavored JSON, or as Teleris has said in the comments, tiddlywiki tiddlers could be the substrate. So could a node as well could in fact also be a WASM blob.
Oh, yes, certainly. And actually, an area of research I'm very excited about that Fission is working on is the idea of hosting, is, as I understand it, WASM blobs on IPFS, and then executing them in ways that have certain security guarantees. Am I getting this right, Boris? Maybe you could talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the fan shout out. So IPVM, or the Interplanetary Virtual Machine, is the protocol for decentralized computation with content addressing. And Fission is in the midst of launching and making available the Everywhere Computer. So much like Subconscious is the app and Noosphere is the protocol, Everywhere Computer is our platform, and IPVM is the protocol that anyone can implement. And we're focusing on content addressed WASM that can run everywhere, whether that's in your browser or, executed 1,000 times by servers that you and your friends use or elsewhere. And what I'm excited about with as things get clearer for us, and we focus on this as the prime purpose of Fission, is leaning into other friendly protocols like Noosphere and saying, great, go over there if you want sync.
I love that. I was going to say, I'm really excited about the sort of ambient interoperability that you get for free with content addressing. And under the hood, Noosphere uses content addressing. Actually, we sort of layer a decentralized name system on top based on pet names, and we layer some self-sovereign cryptographic signing on top to enable you to have like authorship via your public key and to enable things like end-to-end encryption in the fullness of time. But under the hood, it's content addresses, and that means that you're able to kind of basically like freely mesh with anything else that is content addressed.
Yeah, I want to get to some end-to-end loops. So as an example, can we take a particular chunk of subtext and have a IPVM function that transforms it into logsec flavored markdown? And that's a really simplistic use case, but it's the kind of stuff where like I need it. And I also think that for everyone listening around, Gordon and Boris are the dreaming, glorious future, and Chris is just going, can we make this stuff, like, can we lock down some releases and just get this working?
Yeah.
Right, Chris?
Can we build a notebook app? Is this possible?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can we load a note at all? It turns out like the answer to this question is now yes. We're in a closed beta, and it is working, but the amount of boulder pushing uphill that we had to do was not small, and I'm excited to see the boulder roll down the other side now.
Yeah, exactly. I'm excited about this, and as well in actively working with this. One idea that we've had as people look at the everywhere computer stuff was can you write me a small function that if I give it some data, it will output like a graphical sparkline as a PNG that I can just like embed in my blog. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
that's great. And is that posting frequency based on timestamps of nodes that I've put into my subconscious or something like that, right? I'm like, that's a great scoped thing that we can do. We're hitting the top of the hour, so what's next for subconscious? How do we get involved in the open beta? How can we help? Where do we go if we want to get involved in the protocol? So.
Perfect. Well, I can talk about what's next for Subconscious, and then I'll hand it over to Chris to talk about the protocol. So what is next for Subconscious? We're in a small closed beta at the moment as we sort of iron out, I guess, some of the radioactive bits in protocol land and just gradually improve the product. I'm actually excited about where we are on the product side. I think the app was a little bit samey for a while, but we've recently been able to land many of the features that we've been envisioning for a long time. And I'll just sort of tease that the product now feels a little bit like Tinder for ideas, which I'm pretty excited about, So I guess you could say it's a little bit like spaced repetition, but instead of being focused on memorization, which I feel is a bit boring, it's focused on, generating creative insights, helping you find connections, helping you sort of organize your notes in an ambient way, and just generally causing your knowledge to self-organize from the bottom up. So we're pretty excited about making headway on the closed beta, and we're looking forward to an open beta before, I think, too long. If anyone's interested on the call, I'd be happy to, we can send over the Subconscious waitlist, and we'll do our best to roll you into the beta period, whether that means now during the closed beta or as we roll into a more open beta. Chris, what's next for Noosphere?
Yeah, so we're embarking on some pretty significant work for Noosphere. One of the big ticket items for us in the coming months is to support private syncable data across the user's devices. If you're interested in getting involved in these topics or just anything we've discussed in the podcast, then my first recommendation would be to come to our Discord and just chat with us there. But if you're handy with code and you like GitHub, I definitely recommend our GitHub project. You can file issues, you can read how to build the library for yourself. And me and other folks on our team, we're always happy to talk to the community basically 24/7 directly if you are trying to integrate Noosphere in something you're building, or if you're just kind of curious about how certain aspects of it work. We love to talk about it. So please find us in Discord.
Awesome. Yeah, I've dropped a link there. I'm saying this to you. I have on my backlog, and often the holidays, the end of the year, is traditionally for me been tinker with my notes and blogs time. So I'm looking forward to working with Orb and getting something up and running for that. And I'm really looking forward for 2024. And I will say, actually, the Subconscious Discord is amazing. All Discords have their own flavor. Gordon and Chris and the rest of the Subconscious team, and really the participants, the community there is lovely. And it's been really fun to be a part of that. So I definitely encourage that. The Fission Discord leans more computer science futures, which is fun as well. But it's been great to be part of that community. And thank you for hosting that. And thank you for coming and sharing today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks
and
so
yeah,
much.
just to reiterate, we'd love to see any of you all on the Subconscious Discord, and we've been really, lucky to have a very friendly and helpful group of folks join us in this journey. So please come along.